The first gunshot tore through the autumn air like thunder, jolting Virgil Hayes from the motionless vigil he'd maintained at his wife's grave since sunrise. He didn't flinch, didn't even blink. After burying Sarah 3 days ago, gunfire seemed trivial compared to the hollow ache that had carved itself into his chest. Colorado Territory, 1875, and Virgil had already decided the rest of his life would be measured in the quiet moments spent at this lonely spot on the prairie, where wildflowers now marked the final resting place of the only woman he'd ever loved. The second shot, closer this time, finally pulled his gaze from the crude wooden cross he'd fashioned with his own hands. Virgil rose slowly from his knees, dust coating the worn denim of his pants, and adjusted the weathered Stetson that shaded his face from the relentless western sun. At 32, grief had etched lines around his eyes that hadn't been there a month before, when Sarah had still been smiling, still been breathing. "Damn it all," he muttered, drawing his revolver as a woman's scream pierced the distance. His instinct was to ignore it. The world had taken everything from him. He owed it nothing in return. But Sarah would have expected better of him. Even in death, she had a way of guiding his moral compass. Virgil pressed his calloused fingers to his lips, then touched them to the cross. "I'll be back, darlin'," he promised, before turning toward the sound of trouble. He mounted his chestnut mare, Penny, and rode toward the commotion. As he crested a small hill, he spotted a stagecoach tilted awkwardly on the road, one wheel shattered. 2 men on horseback circled it like vultures, firing warning shots into the air while a third tried to wrench open the coach door. Inside, a woman was putting up one hell of a fight, judging by the curses coming from the would-be robber. Virgil had seen enough. He urged Penny forward, firing a shot into the sky. "That'll be enough of that," he called out, his voice rough from disuse. The bandits whirled toward him, clearly not expecting interference on this lonely stretch of road. Virgil didn't waste time with warnings. He fired again, this time aiming for the shoulder of the man at the coach door. The bandit howled in pain, clutching his arm as he stumbled backward. "Next one won't be so considerate," Virgil warned, his revolver steady despite the months of neglect that had weakened his once powerful frame. Grief had hollowed him out, but some skills remained bone-deep. The bandits exchanged glances, weighing their options. Apparently deciding that one stage passenger wasn't worth dying for, they retreated, the wounded man cursing as they disappeared over the horizon. Only when they were gone did Virgil approach the coach. "Madam?"
"You can come out now."
"They're gone." The door creaked open slowly, and a woman emerged, clutching a small leather-bound book to her chest. She was in her late 20s, Virgil guessed, with chestnut hair pulled back in a practical bun, though several strands had escaped during the commotion. Her traveling dress was dusty but of good quality, and her eyes, a striking green, regarded him with equal parts gratitude and wariness. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice steadier than he would have expected after such an ordeal. "I believe you just saved my life, or, at the very least, spared me a most unpleasant experience." Virgil nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude. No decent man would have done differently. The woman glanced at the injured driver slumped on the ground beside the coach. "My driver needs help. I've tried to stop the bleeding, but..." Virgil dismounted and knelt beside the man, who had a nasty gash on his forehead. "He's breathing steady. Probably just knocked out when they forced the coach off the road." He looked up at the woman. "You headed to Clearwater?" "Yes," she replied. "I'm to take over the schoolhouse there." Virgil's chest tightened. The schoolhouse Sarah had dreamed of teaching in before the fever took her. "You're a fair piece from town still. Driver's in no shape to continue, and that won't get you anywhere." The woman smoothed her skirts, an unconscious gesture that spoke of proper upbringing. "I'm Dorothy Wilson." "Mrs. Dorothy Wilson," she added, and Virgil noticed the simple gold band on her finger. "I can pay you for your trouble if you'll help us to town." "Virgil Hayes," he replied. "And I don't need payment for doing what's right." He glanced back toward the hill where Sarah's grave lay, invisible from this distance but permanently etched in his mind. Let me secure your driver, and we'll get you to Clearwater. As he worked to make the injured man comfortable across Penny's back, Virgil felt Dorothy's gaze on him. You were at a grave, she said softly, not a question but an observation. I'm sorry to have pulled you away. Virgil stiffened. How do you know that? Dorothy's expression softened. The dirt on your knees. The flowers in your saddlebag. And there's a look men get, Mr. Hayes. I recognize it because I've seen it in my own mirror. Something in her tone made Virgil really look at her for the first time. The strength in her eyes wasn't just from surviving the robbery attempt. It was the kind that came from enduring something far worse. My condolences, Mrs. Wilson, he said gruffly. And mine to you, she replied. They began the slow journey toward Clearwater, Dorothy walking beside Penny while Virgil led the horse by the reins. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the prairie grass, and the vast emptiness that had once been a comfort to Virgil now seemed to emphasize how alone they all were out here. How long has it been? Dorothy asked after they had walked in silence for nearly a mile. 3 days, Virgil answered, the words scraping his throat like sandpaper. You? 2 years. Dorothy's hand went to her wedding band. Thomas was a cavalry officer. Apache raid near Fort Bowie. Virgil nodded.
No platitudes, no empty sympathies.
Just recognition of a shared wound. And your wife, Sarah, fever. The words were all he could manage. How could he explain that Sarah had been carrying their first child when the sickness came? That he'd lost everything that mattered in the span of 3 terrible days? Dorothy seemed to understand his reticence. Clearwater needs a school teacher badly, according to the correspondence I received. The town is growing. It is, Virgil confirmed. Cattle business is good. Railroad's planning a stop there next year. And you? Are you a rancher?
Was.
Still am, I suppose. Virgil hadn't thought about the ranch in days. His foreman Jensen was handling things. Got a small spread north of town. Nothing fancy. They crested a rise, and Clearwater came into view in the distance, a collection of wooden buildings and corrals nestled against the backdrop of mountains. It's lovely, Dorothy said, something like hope in her voice. Virgil didn't respond. He hadn't seen beauty in anything since they'd put Sarah in the ground. The sun was setting by the time they reached town, casting a golden glow over the main street. Heads turned as the odd trio made their way toward Doc Miller's office, a man leading a horse, carrying an unconscious stagecoach driver, accompanied by a well-dressed woman covered in trail dust. Sheriff Wade Collins emerged from his office, hand resting casually on his holstered gun. Hayes, he acknowledged with a nod.
Trouble.
Stage robbery attempt about 8 miles east, Virgil replied. Driver's hurt. This is Mrs. Wilson, the new schoolteacher. Collins removed his hat.
Madam.
We've been expecting you, though not quite like this. Life seldom goes according to plan, Sheriff, Dorothy replied with a tired smile. I'm just grateful Mr. Hayes was nearby. Doc. Collins called toward the medical office. Got a patient for you. Doc Miller appeared, a gray-haired man with spectacles perched on his nose. He assessed the situation quickly and directed Virgil to bring the driver inside. After they had settled the injured man on an examination table, Miller shooed them out. I'll handle it from here. Mrs. Wilson, Mayor Thompson arranged rooms for you at Mrs. Abernathy's boarding house. It's just down the street. Thank you, Doctor. Dorothy turned to Virgil. Mr. Hayes, I can't thank you enough. Virgil shifted uncomfortably. Just did what needed doing. Sheriff Collins clapped him on the shoulder. First time you've been to town since. He trailed off. Good to see you, Hayes. Virgil nodded stiffly. I should get back. Dorothy's eyes widened. Surely not tonight? It's nearly dark. I know the way, Virgil said. Collins frowned. Sarah wouldn't want you sitting out there all night, Hayes. Stay at the hotel. Head back in mourning." The mention of Sarah's name sent a fresh wave of pain through Virgil's chest. "I told her I'd be back," he said quietly. Understanding dawned in Dorothy's eyes. "She'll forgive you for taking shelter, Mr. Hayes. The dead don't measure time as we do." Something in her words, the gentle certainty with which she spoke of the dead, made Virgil pause. After a moment, he nodded. "One night, I'll show Mrs. Wilson to the boarding house," Collins offered. "Hotel's that way, Hayes. Tell Bert I said to give you a good rate." As they parted ways, Dorothy called after him. "Mr. Hayes? Thank you again. For everything." Virgil touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement, then turned toward the hotel, feeling the weight of Sarah's absence even more keenly in town, where memories of her lurked around every corner. That night, lying on an unfamiliar bed, staring at a water-stained ceiling, Virgil wondered what Sarah would think of Dorothy Wilson. She'd have liked her, he decided. Sarah had always admired strong women, and there was something undeniably strong about the widow who'd fought off stagecoach robbers and then walked miles in the dust without complaint. But such thoughts felt like betrayal. It had only been 3 days. The dirt on Sarah's grave was still fresh. Virgil rolled onto his side, closed his eyes, and tried to remember Sarah's face. It terrified him how quickly the details were already beginning to blur. Mourning brought no relief from his grief, but it did bring clarity. He needed to return to Sarah's grave, to make sure she was still protected, still remembered. After a sparse breakfast at the hotel restaurant, Virgil retrieved Penny from the livery stable and prepared to leave town. As he adjusted his saddle, a familiar voice called his name. "Mr. Hayes." Dorothy Wilson approached, looking refreshed despite yesterday's ordeal. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair neatly arranged, and carried a small carpet bag. "Mrs. Wilson." Virgil greeted her with a nod. "I was hoping to speak with you before you left," she said. "The stagecoach won't be repaired for several days, and my belongings, including my teaching materials, are still with the disabled coach." Virgil frowned. "Sheriff can probably send someone to retrieve them." "Perhaps," Dorothy agreed. "But there's something else. Something personal." She hesitated. "When my husband died, I planted wildflowers at his grave. It brought me comfort. I noticed you had wildflowers in your saddlebag yesterday, and I thought perhaps I could accompany you to pay my respects." Virgil stared at her, taken aback by the request. Sarah's grave was private, sacred. The idea of sharing that space with a stranger seemed wrong somehow. And yet, Dorothy wasn't exactly a stranger anymore, and there was something in her eyes that spoke of understanding, not intrusion. "It's a fair ride," he said finally. "I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Hayes." After a moment's consideration, Virgil nodded. "We'll need another horse." Within the hour, they were riding east out of Clearwater, Dorothy seated comfortably on a borrowed mare. She rode well, Virgil noted, with the ease of someone who'd spent time in the saddle. "My father raised horses in Virginia," she explained when he commented on it. "Before the war." "Which side?" Virgil asked, immediately regretting the question. The war had ended a decade ago, but divisions still ran deep. "We lost everything to the Union," Dorothy said matter-of-factly. "But Thomas fought for the North. Love has a way of healing old wounds." They rode in companionable silence after that, the rhythm of hoofbeats a soothing counterpoint to the birdsong that filled the morning air. The prairies stretched out around them, a sea of grass and wildflowers under an endless blue sky. As they approached the small hill where Sarah rested, Virgil felt the familiar tightness in his chest. "Just over that rise," he said, his voice rough. Dorothy slowed her horse, allowing him to lead the way. When they reached the grave, Virgil dismounted and stood for a moment, hat in hand, looking down at the simple cross. Dorothy remained on her horse until he glanced back at her, silently giving permission. She dismounted gracefully and approached, her steps reverent. "She must have been very special," Dorothy said softly. "She was everything," Virgil replied. He knelt and began clearing away dead leaves that had fallen on the grave overnight. "We were married 5 years. Met when she came west to teach. She was from Boston originally." Dorothy smiled. "I'm from Richmond myself." Did she find it difficult to adjust to frontier life? At first. Virgil found himself wanting to talk about Sarah, something he hadn't done with anyone. She missed libraries the most. Used to order books by mail, read to me at night, even though I'd fall asleep halfway through. What was her favorite? Emerson. She loved his essays. Virgil pulled the wilted wildflowers from his saddlebag and replaced them with fresh ones he'd gathered that morning. "She was carrying our first child when she got sick." Dorothy's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, Mr. Hayes. I'm so sorry." Virgil nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When he found his voice again, he asked, "Did you and your husband have children?" "No," Dorothy said, a shadow crossing her face. "We tried. It wasn't meant to be." They sat in silence beside the grave, two people bound by loss in the vast emptiness of the prairie. After a while, Dorothy reached into her pocket and pulled out a small packet of seeds. "May I?" she asked. At Virgil's nod, she moved to the edges of the grave and carefully planted the seeds in the soil. "Black-eyed Susans," she explained. "They're hardy. They'll bloom year after year." Virgil watched her hands, gentle yet sure, as they worked the earth. "Thank you," he said, meaning it. Dorothy looked up at him, her green eyes catching the sunlight. "After Thomas died, an old Apache woman told me that grief is like a river. You can't stop it, can't fight it. You have to learn to swim with it, or it will drown you. Is that what you did? Learn to swim." "I'm still learning," Dorothy admitted. "Some days the current is stronger than others." They stayed by the grave until midday, when the sun grew too hot for comfort. As they prepared to leave, Virgil found himself reluctant to go. It felt wrong to leave Sarah alone again. Dorothy seemed to sense his hesitation. "The flowers will keep her company," she said gently. "And you'll be back." "Tomorrow," Virgil promised, both to Sarah and to himself. "Would you mind if I joined you again?" Dorothy asked. "Just until the stagecoach is repaired. I find it peaceful here." Virgil should have said no. Should have protected this sacred space. But there was something about Dorothy Wilson, a kindred spirit in grief, that made him nod instead. "I'd be obliged for the company," he said. They rode back to Clearwater side by side, the prairie wind at their backs. For the first time in days, Virgil felt something other than despair. It wasn't happiness, he wasn't sure he'd ever feel that again, but it was a momentary respite from the crushing weight of his loss. As they entered town, Sheriff Collins waved them down. "Mrs. Wilson, we've retrieved your belongings from the stagecoach. Had them taken to Mrs. Abernathy's." "Thank you, Sheriff," Dorothy replied. "How is the driver?" "Awake and complaining about Doc's cooking," Collins said with a grin. "He'll be fine." He turned to Virgil. "Jensen's been looking for you. Says there's some issue with the north pasture fence." Virgil had almost forgotten he had responsibilities beyond tending Sarah's grave. "I'll head out there now." "Will you be at the town meeting tonight?"
Collins asked.
"Mayor's discussing the school situation." Dorothy perked up at this. "I'd be very interested in attending." 7 o'clock at the church, Collins informed her. "Hayes, you should come too. Get out among the living for a spell." Virgil bristled at the implication, but kept his temper in check. "We'll see." After parting ways with Dorothy, Virgil rode out to his ranch for the first time since Sarah's death. The familiar sight of the modest 2-story house they'd built together, the barn, the corrals, it all seemed to belong to another life now. Jensen, a weathered cowhand in his 50s who'd been with Virgil since he'd started the ranch, emerged from the barn looking relieved.
"Boss.
Starting to think you weren't coming back. Just checking on things," Virgil said, dismounting. Sheriff said there's trouble with a north fence? Jensen nodded. Couple of steers got out yesterday. We rounded them up, but that fence needs proper fixing. He hesitated. Men were asking if they should start looking for new work. Virgil frowned. Why would they do that? Because you haven't been here, boss. Word gets around. They thought you might be selling up. The thought hadn't even occurred to Virgil, but now that Jensen mentioned it, he wondered if that might be best. What was the point of all this, without Sarah? I'm not selling, he said, more to buy time than out of conviction. Tell the men I'll be back tomorrow to help with that fence. Jensen looked relieved. Good to hear. And boss, we're all real sorry about Mrs. Hayes. She was a fine woman. Virgil nodded, his throat tight. The best. After checking on the rest of the ranch and ensuring things were in order, Virgil found himself riding back to town as evening approached. He told himself it was because he needed supplies, but in truth, the empty house held too many memories. As he passed the church, he noticed people gathering for the town meeting. Against his better judgment, he tied Penny to the hitching post and went inside. The church was nearly full, but Virgil spotted Dorothy sitting near the front. She smiled when she saw him, gesturing to an empty space beside her. Ignoring the curious glances from townspeople who hadn't seen him since the funeral, Virgil made his way to her side. I wasn't sure you'd come, Dorothy whispered as he sat down. Neither was I, Virgil admitted. Mayor Thompson, a portly man with impressive whiskers, called the meeting to order. After discussing various town matters, he turned to the subject of the school. As you all know, we've been fortunate enough to secure a new teacher, he announced, nodding toward Dorothy. Mrs. Wilson comes highly recommended from back east. However, there is the matter of the schoolhouse itself. Virgil tensed. He knew what was coming. The building was damaged in last month's storm, Thompson continued. The roof needs replacing, and there's structural work required before classes can begin. We're looking for volunteers to help with repairs. Several hands went up, including Jensen's, who had slipped into the meeting late. Virgil kept his own hands firmly in his lap. Dorothy leaned closer. Was this the school where your wife was to teach? Virgil nodded curtly. She never got to see it finished. After the meeting, as people filtered out of the church, Mayor Thompson approached them. Mrs. Wilson, a pleasure to finally meet you properly. Ann Hayes, good to see you. I was sorry to hear about Sarah. She was very excited about teaching here. Virgil mumbled a thanks, anxious to escape the conversation. I was just telling Mrs. Wilson about our schoolhouse situation, Thompson continued, oblivious to Virgil's discomfort. It needs considerable work. I'd be happy to help in any way I can, Dorothy offered. Though I'm afraid carpentry isn't among my skills. Thompson laughed. We need strong backs for that part. But we could use help organizing the books and supplies that have already been donated. I'd be delighted, Dorothy said. Thompson turned to Virgil. We could use your expertise too, Hayes. You built that fine house of yours, after all. Before Virgil could refuse, Dorothy spoke up. Mr. Hayes has been kind enough to accompany me to visit his wife's resting place. I've been planting flowers there. Thompson's eyebrows rose in surprise. Have you now? Well, that's very kind of you both. Virgil felt a surge of gratitude toward Dorothy for steering the conversation away from the school. If you'll excuse us, Mayor, he said, tipping his hat. Outside, the evening air had cooled, and stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Virgil walked Dorothy to the boarding house, their steps slow on the wooden sidewalk. Thank you, he said finally, for not letting him press me about the school. Dorothy glanced at him. It would be too painful, I imagine, working on the building she never got to teach in. Yes. Virgil was continually surprised by how well she seemed to understand his grief. Will you still want to ride out to the grave tomorrow? If you're willing, Dorothy said. Though I understand you have ranch work to attend to. Virgil nodded. North fence needs fixing, but I could meet you afterward. Around midday? I'll be ready, Dorothy promised. They had reached the boarding house, and she paused at the steps. Good night, Mr. Hayes. Virgil, he corrected her. Mr. Hayes makes me feel like my father. Dorothy smiled, the expression transforming her face, making her look younger, almost carefree. Then you must call me Dorothy. Good night, Virgil. Good night, Dorothy, he replied, tipping his hat before turning toward the hotel where he would spend another night, unable to face the emptiness of his home. The next morning, Virgil rode out to his ranch at dawn. Jensen and the other hands were surprised but pleased to see him, and they set to work on the north fence immediately. The physical labor felt good, forcing Virgil to focus on the task at hand rather than his grief. By midday, with the fence repaired, Virgil cleaned up and rode back to town to meet Dorothy. He found her waiting outside the boarding house, a small basket in hand. I thought we might have lunch by the grave, she explained. Mrs. Abernathy packed some cold chicken and biscuits. Virgil wasn't sure how he felt about eating beside Sarah's resting place, but he nodded agreement. As they rode out of town, Dorothy asked about his morning. Fix the fence, he said. Got 3 hands working for me. Good men. Do you enjoy ranching? Dorothy asked. Virgil considered the question. I enjoy the freedom of it. Being my own boss. Working outdoors. He glanced at her. What about teaching? Is it something you've always wanted to do? Dorothy smiled. Since I was a girl. There's something remarkable about watching a child grasp a new idea, seeing that moment of understanding dawn in their eyes. Sarah felt the same way, Virgil said, surprised to find he could speak her name without his voice breaking. She used to practice her lessons on me. Was she a patient teacher? The most patient woman I ever knew, Virgil replied, a ghost of a smile touching his lips for the first time in days. Had to be, to put up with me. When they reached Sarah's grave, Virgil was pleased to see the wildflowers he'd placed the day before were still fresh. Dorothy spread a small blanket beside the grave, careful not to disturb the earth, and unpacked her basket. Is this all right? She asked, hesitant now. We don't have to eat here if it feels wrong. Virgil looked at the grave, then at the blanket, and finally at Dorothy's concerned face. It's all right, he decided. Sarah would have liked a picnic. She was always trying to get me to take more breaks, enjoy the simple things. They ate in companionable silence, the vast prairie stretching around them under the endless blue sky. After the meal, Dorothy produced a book from her basket. I thought perhaps. Would you like me to read aloud? I brought some Emerson, since you mentioned it was Sarah's favorite. The thoughtfulness of the gesture caught Virgil off guard. I'd like that, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Dorothy opened the book and began to read, her voice clear and melodious in the quiet afternoon. To believe your own thought, to believe that what is true for you in your private heart is true, for all men that is genius. As she read, Virgil closed his eyes, letting the familiar words wash over him. He could almost imagine it was Sarah reading to him, as she had so many evenings by their fireplace. But Dorothy's voice was different, lower, with a slight southern lilt, and there was something comforting in that difference. It didn't try to replace his memories of Sarah, but existed alongside them. When Dorothy finished reading, she closed the book gently. She had excellent taste in literature, your Sarah. She did, Virgil agreed. He looked at the simple cross marking her grave. I should have a proper headstone made. That would be nice, Dorothy said. Perhaps with one of her favorite quotations? Virgil nodded, already thinking of which words would best honor Sarah's memory. They sat in silence for a while longer, until the position of the sun reminded them of the time. I should get back, Dorothy said. I promised to help organize the school supplies this afternoon. As they rode back toward town, Virgil found himself speaking more freely than he had in months. He told Dorothy about how he'd met Sarah, about their courtship, about the home they'd built together. In return, She shared stories of her life with Thomas, their dreams, their struggles. He would have wanted me to continue living, Dorothy said as Clearwater came into view. That's what I tell myself on the hardest days. That he wouldn't want me to stop living just because he did. The words struck Virgil like a physical blow. Would Sarah want him to spend his days at her graveside, neglecting the ranch they'd built together, shutting himself away from the world? He knew the answer but wasn't ready to accept it. At the edge of town, Dorothy turned to him. Will I see you tomorrow? Virgil hesitated. I should spend the day at the ranch. There's work that needs doing. Disappointment flickered across Dorothy's face, quickly masked. Of course. Your livelihood is important. But Virgil found himself adding, I could come by in the evening. Maybe walk you to dinner at the hotel restaurant. Dorothy's smile returned, brightening her whole countenance. I'd like that very much. As Virgil watched her ride toward the boarding house, he felt a confusion of emotions. Guilt that he could enjoy another woman's company so soon after Sarah's death. Anger at himself for that enjoyment. And beneath it all, a tiny spark of something he wasn't ready to name, something that felt dangerously like hope. That evening, after a full day's work at the ranch, Virgil cleaned up, put on his one good shirt, and rode back to town. He felt nervous, like a schoolboy calling on a girl for the first time, which was ridiculous. This wasn't courting. It was just dinner with a new friend who understood his loss. Dorothy was waiting on the boarding house porch, wearing a simple but elegant dress of deep blue that brought out the green of her eyes. Her hair was arranged differently, with soft curls framing her face. You look nice, Virgil said, the words feeling inadequate. Thank you, Dorothy replied. It feels good to wear something other than traveling clothes. The hotel restaurant was busy, but they secured a table in the corner. Several townspeople nodded greetings, curious glances following them. Virgil knew there would be talk the grieving rancher and the new widow teacher, dining together, but found he didn't much care. As they ate, Dorothy told him about her afternoon organizing books for the school. There's quite a good collection already. Your wife's influence, I imagine. She wrote to everyone she knew back east, asking for donations, Virgil confirmed. Said no child should grow up without books, no matter how far from civilization they lived. A woman after my own heart, Dorothy said warmly. I've been thinking about how to arrange the classroom, once the repairs are complete. The mayor says work will begin next week. Virgil nodded, trying to ignore the tightness in his chest at the mention of the school. Jensen's volunteered to help with the roof. That's generous of him, Dorothy said. After a pause, she added carefully, it would mean a great deal to the children to have a proper school before winter sets in. Virgil understood what she was suggesting. I'm not ready, he said quietly. Dorothy reached across the table and briefly touched his hand. Of course. I'm sorry for bringing it up. The gentle understanding in her eyes made Virgil feel both grateful and ashamed. He changed the subject, asking about her plans for curriculum, and was rewarded with Dorothy's animated descriptions of her teaching philosophy. After dinner, Virgil walked Dorothy back to the boarding house. The night was clear, stars sprinkled across the sky like diamond dust. They paused on the porch, neither quite ready to say goodnight. Thank you for dinner, Dorothy said. It's been a very long time since I've enjoyed an evening so much. Me too, Virgil admitted. Will you be all right here? While they fix up the school, I mean. Dorothy nodded. Mrs. Abernathy is very kind, and I'm looking forward to meeting the children and their families. She hesitated. I understand if you're busy at the ranch, but if you'd like to ride out to the grave again sometime. I'd like that, Virgil said. Day after tomorrow, maybe? I need to ride to the North Range tomorrow, check on a new calf that's been ailing. Day after tomorrow, Dorothy agreed with a smile. Good night, Virgil. Good night, Dorothy. As Virgil rode back to his ranch that night, he felt the strangest sensation, as if he were waking up from a long, dark sleep. The pain of Sarah's loss was still there, an ache that might never fully heal, but alongside it was a new awareness of the world around him. The crisp night air, the sound of insects in the grass, the distant howl of a coyote. For the first time since Sarah's death, he spent the night in their home. The emptiness was still painful, but somehow more bearable than before. He slept in their bed, surrounded by her things, and while grief visited him in his dreams, it didn't overwhelm him. The next day, Virgil threw himself into ranch work, riding out to the North Range with Jensen to check on the ailing calf. They found it improving, nursing strongly from its mother. "Good to have you back, boss," Jensen said as they rode home in the afternoon light. "Men were worried about you." "I'm sorry for that," Virgil replied. "Wasn't thinking straight after Sarah passed." Jensen nodded. "No need to apologize. Grief hits every man different." After a pause, he added, "Folks in town say you've been spending time with a new schoolteacher." Virgil tensed. "Just being neighborly." "She lost her husband, too." "Didn't mean nothing by it," Jensen assured him. "Just good to see you among people again." Sarah would have wanted that. That evening, alone in the house, Virgil found himself standing in the doorway of what was to have been the nursery. They'd painted it yellow, a cheerful color that Sarah said would suit a boy or a girl. A cradle stood in the corner, built by Virgil's own hands, never used. For the first time since the funeral, Virgil allowed himself to weep openly, great heaving sobs that tore from his chest and echoed in the empty house. He cried until he had no tears left, until exhaustion overtook him and he slumped against the doorframe, spent. In that moment of complete vulnerability, he felt a strange sense of release. Not healing, it was too soon for that, but perhaps the beginning of acceptance. The following day, Virgil rode to town earlier than planned. His first stop was the stonemason shop, where he arranged for a proper headstone for Sarah's grave. He chose a simple design but took care with the inscription, "Sarah Elizabeth Hayes, beloved wife and teacher. Trust thyself, every heart vibrates to that iron string." Emerson, his next stop, surprised even him. He found himself at the old schoolhouse, where a group of men were already at work repairing the storm damage. Jensen was among them, nailing down roofing shingles. Mayor Thompson spotted Virgil and approached, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Hayes, didn't expect to see you here." "Came to help," Virgil said simply. "Where do you need me?" Thompson's surprise gave way to appreciation. "We could use a hand with the west wall. Got some rotted boards need replacing." For the next several hours, Virgil worked alongside the other men, the familiar rhythm of physical labor soothing his troubled mind. Every hammer blow, every saw cut, felt like both a tribute to Sarah and a step away from the paralyzing grief that had consumed him. Dorothy arrived around midday with several other women, bringing lunch for the workers. Her face lit up when she saw Virgil among them. "This is a surprise," she said, handing him a plate of food. "Thought it was time," Virgil replied. He gestured to the schoolhouse. "She would have wanted it finished. For the children." Dorothy's eyes shone with understanding. Yes, she would have. They ate together on the schoolhouse steps, discussing the progress of the repairs. Dorothy shared her ideas for the interior arrangement, her excitement infectious. Virgil found himself offering suggestions, drawn into her vision for the school. "You should come see the inside," Dorothy said when they'd finished eating. "The bookshelves are in place, and the desk should arrive next week." Virgil hesitated only briefly before nodding. Following Dorothy into the schoolhouse was harder than he'd anticipated. This was where Sarah should have been, teaching children, fulfilling her dream. But as Dorothy showed him around, describing her plans with such passion, Virgil began to see the space through new eyes. "I thought the reading corner could go here," Dorothy was saying, gesturing to a sunny spot by the window, with cushions for the younger children to sit on during story time. "Sarah would have liked that," Virgil said. "She always said children learn better when they're comfortable." Dorothy smiled. A wise woman. I wish I could have known her. She would have liked you, Virgil said, realizing as he spoke that it was true. You have the same passion for teaching. They continued working through the afternoon, Virgil focusing on repairing the western wall while Dorothy organized books and supplies. By evening, significant progress had been made, and Mayor Thompson declared the day a success. At this rate, we'll have the school ready to open in 2 weeks, he announced, to cheers from the volunteers. As people began dispersing, Virgil approached Dorothy. Still want to ride out to the grave tomorrow? Of course, she replied. Shall we go in the morning? I'd like to see how the wildflower seeds are doing. They agreed to meet at sunrise, and Virgil returned to his ranch feeling more at peace than he had in weeks. The house was still empty, still filled with memories, but somehow less oppressive than before. The next morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect late summer day. Virgil met Dorothy at the edge of town, and they rode in companionable silence towards Sarah's grave. As they crested the hill, Virgil was surprised to see tiny green shoots already emerging around the wooden cross. The seeds are sprouting, Dorothy said, delighted. Black-eyed Susans grow quickly. They'll bloom before the first frost. They dismounted, and Dorothy immediately went to check on the new growth, gently touching the delicate sprouts. Virgil watched her, struck by the care she took with these plants meant to honor a woman she'd never met. I ordered a headstone yesterday, he told her. Should be ready in a few weeks. Dorothy looked up, pleased. That's wonderful, Virgil. Did you choose an inscription? He nodded. One of her favorite Emerson quotes. The one about trusting yourself. Perfect, Dorothy approved. She sat beside the grave, arranging her skirts. I've been thinking about what you said, about Sarah liking the reading corner idea. It means a great deal to me, to have your approval for the school plans. You don't need my approval, Virgil said, sitting beside her. Perhaps not, Dorothy acknowledged. But I value it nonetheless. This school was her dream too, after all. They sat in silence for a while, the prairie wind rustling the grass around them. Finally, Dorothy spoke again. When Thomas died, I thought my life was over. We'd had such plans, such dreams. She traced patterns in the dirt with her finger. For months, I could barely get out of bed. Then one day, my neighbor's child brought me a drawing he'd made. It was supposed to be me, teaching. He'd heard I was a teacher before I married Thomas. She smiled at the memory. It was a terrible drawing, really. I looked like a scarecrow with a book. But it reminded me that I was still alive, that I still had something to offer the world. She looked at Virgil. That's when I decided to teach again. To honor Thomas by living as fully as I could. Virgil understood what she was trying to tell him. I'm trying, Dorothy. It's just. Everything reminds me of her. Of what we lost. I know, Dorothy said softly. It will always hurt. But eventually, the good memories begin to outweigh the pain of loss. She reached out and briefly touched his hand. I'm not saying it happens quickly. It took me nearly a year before I could think of Thomas without crying. But it does happen. Virgil nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. They sat together until the sun was high overhead, sometimes talking, sometimes silent, sharing the unique bond of those who have loved and lost. As they prepared to return to town, Virgil made a decision. I'd like to help with the schoolhouse again tomorrow, if that's all right. Dorothy's face brightened. More than all right. The children will benefit from your craftsmanship for years to come. Over the next 2 weeks, a routine developed. Virgil would spend mornings at his ranch, afternoons helping with the schoolhouse repairs, and evenings dining with Dorothy. Every few days, they would ride out to Sarah's grave together, checking on the growing wildflowers and reading aloud from Dorothy's books. The townspeople noticed, of course. There were whispers, curious glances. Some thought it inappropriate for the widow and widower to spend so much time together so soon after their losses. Others saw it for what it was. Two wounded souls finding comfort in shared understanding. Sheriff Collins was among the latter. "Good to see you both healing," he told Virgil one afternoon at the schoolhouse. "Sarah would approve, I think." Virgil wasn't sure about that, but he was beginning to believe that Sarah wouldn't want him to stop living. The guilt still came, waves of it that would wash over him unexpectedly, but it was less crushing each time. The day before the school was set to open, Dorothy found Virgil installing the last of the bookshelves. "It's perfect," she said, surveying the transformed space. "Better than I could have hoped for." Virgil stood back to admire their work. The schoolhouse gleamed with fresh paint and polish. Desks stood in neat rows, books lined the shelves, and colorful maps hung on the walls. Sunlight streamed through clean windows, illuminating the reading corner with its cushions and small chairs. "Sarah would have loved it," he said, surprised to find he could say her name with more fondness than pain. "Will you come tomorrow?" Dorothy asked. "For the opening?" The children would love to meet the man who helped build their school. Virgil hesitated. It would be a public event, a celebration. He wasn't sure he was ready for that kind of scrutiny. "You don't have to," Dorothy added quickly. "I understand if it's too much." Virgil really looked at her, and saw not just the understanding in her eyes, but also the hope. In that moment, he realized how much her friendship had come to mean to him over these past weeks. "I'll be there," he promised. That evening, they rode out to Sarah's grave one last time before the school opening. The wildflowers were growing strong now, tiny buds beginning to form. Soon they would bloom, bringing color to the prairie hillside. "I ordered flowers for the schoolhouse tomorrow," Dorothy told him as they sat beside the grave. "Daisies. I hope that's appropriate." Sarah loved daisies, Virgil confirmed. Simple and honest, she called them. Dorothy smiled. "Like herself, I imagine." "Yes." Virgil looked at the simple cross, soon to be replaced by the headstone he'd ordered. "She was the most honest person I ever knew. Never pretended to be anything she wasn't." "A rare quality," Dorothy agreed. After a pause, she added, "Virgil, there's something I should tell you. Mayor Thompson has offered me the teacher's cottage to live in, now that it's been repaired. I'll be moving from the boarding house after the school opening tomorrow." Virgil felt an unexpected pang at the news. "That's good. You'll be closer to the school." "Yes." Dorothy hesitated. "But it means our dinners at the hotel. They might be seen differently if I'm living in my own home rather than the boarding house." Virgil understood her concern. A widow and widower dining together when one was merely passing through town was one thing. Once Dorothy was established as the town's teacher, with her own residence, such meetings would take on a more deliberate appearance. "I see," he said, uncertain how to respond. Dorothy rushed to fill the silence. "I've valued our friendship immensely, Virgil. These past weeks. They've meant more to me than I can express. But I would never want to do anything that might dishonor Sarah's memory or make you uncomfortable." Virgil looked at Sarah's grave, then back at Dorothy. The conflict within him was intense. Was it too soon? Would continuing to see Dorothy be a betrayal of Sarah? But then he remembered what Dorothy had said about honoring Thomas by living fully. And he thought about what Sarah would want for him. "I'd still like to see you," he said finally. "I don't much care what people think." The relief on Dorothy's face was palpable. "Nor do I, truly. But I wanted to be certain." They rode back to town as the sun was setting, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber. At the edge of town, they paused. "Until tomorrow, then," Dorothy said. "Until tomorrow," Virgil agreed, watching as she rode toward the boarding house for the last time. That night, in his empty house, Virgil found himself standing before the small mirror in his bedroom, studying his reflection. The man who stared back at him was thinner than he'd been before Sarah's death, with more gray in his beard and deeper lines around his eyes. But there was something else there too, a spark of life that had been missing for months. "Am I doing right by you, Sarah?" he asked aloud, half expecting, hoping, perhaps for some sign, some answer. None came, of course. But as he turned away from the mirror, his gaze fell on a small painting Sarah had done of wildflowers on the prairie. She'd always loved how they persisted, blooming year after year despite harsh conditions. Like the flowers Dorothy had planted on her grave. Persistent. Resilient. The next morning, Virgil dressed in his best clothes and rode to town for the school opening. A crowd had already gathered outside the freshly painted building, parents and children alike excited for this new beginning. Mayor Thompson was making a speech about progress and education, but Virgil barely heard him. He was scanning the crowd for Dorothy. He spotted her standing near the schoolhouse steps, wearing a pretty green dress that matched her eyes. She looked nervous but happy, occasionally bending down to speak to one of the children who would soon be her students. When she saw Virgil, her whole face lit up. She excused herself from the family she'd been speaking with and made her way to his side. "You came," she said, as if she'd half expected him not to. "I promised," Virgil replied. "Place looks good." "It does, doesn't it?" Dorothy gazed at the schoolhouse with pride. 27 students enrolled already. "Can you believe it?" Before Virgil could respond, Mayor Thompson called for everyone's attention. "And now, I'd like to invite our new teacher, Mrs. Wilson, to cut the ribbon and officially open Clearwater School." Dorothy squeezed Virgil's arm briefly before moving forward to accept the scissors from the mayor. As she cut the ribbon to applause and cheers, Virgil felt a surge of emotions: pride, happiness, and yes, a touch of sadness that Sarah wasn't there to see it. But mostly, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months: hope. After the ceremony, as parents and children toured the schoolhouse, Dorothy made a point of introducing Virgil to everyone as the craftsman whose skill made our beautiful bookshelves and reading corner possible. The gratitude in the children's eyes and their parents' handshakes was unexpected but warming. By the time the last family had left, promising to return for the first day of classes on Monday, Virgil felt a connection to the school and the community that he'd been missing since Sarah's death. "Thank you," Dorothy said as they stood alone in the empty classroom.
For everything.
"The school wouldn't be half so wonderful without your help." "I should be thanking you," Virgil replied.
For
"Pulling me back to the land of the living, I suppose." Dorothy smiled, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "We helped each other, I think." They walked together to the teacher's cottage, a small but charming house just behind the school. Dorothy's belongings had already been moved in, though many boxes remained unpacked. "It's lovely," Virgil said, looking around the cozy front room with its stone fireplace and large windows. "Will suit you well." "I think so," Dorothy agreed. "Though it will take some getting used to, living alone again." The words hung between them, laden with meaning neither was quite ready to address. Instead, Virgil changed the subject. "Jensen invited you to Sunday dinner at the ranch," he said. "All the hands want to meet the new teacher. I told him I'd ask if you were interested." Dorothy's eyes widened in surprise. "I'd be honored. But are you sure? Your home is private." Virgil understood what she was really asking. Was he ready to have someone in the home he'd shared with Sarah? The home where they'd planned to raise their child? "I'm sure," he said, and found that he meant it. "It's time to open the doors again. Sarah would want that." Dorothy nodded, understanding the significance of the invitation. "Then I accept with pleasure." Sunday dawned clear and bright, a perfect early autumn day. Virgil spent the morning cleaning the house more thoroughly than he had in months, removing the layer of dust that had settled over everything since Sarah's death. He found himself talking to her as he worked, explaining what he was doing, why it mattered. "You'd like her, Sarah," he said aloud as he polished the dining table Sarah had been so proud of. "She's kind like you. Strong, too, in her own way." It still felt strange, speaking of another woman in the home, he'd shared with his wife. But there was less guilt now, more a sense of continuity. Life moving forward as it must. Jensen and the other hands outdid themselves preparing dinner, roasting a beef joint and making Sarah's favorite corn pudding recipe. By the time Dorothy arrived, driven from town by Sheriff Collins, the ranch house was filled with delicious smells and the sound of men laughing in the kitchen. "This is wonderful," Dorothy said as Virgil showed her around the main floor of the house. "You built this yourself?" "Most of it," Virgil confirmed. "Had help with the foundation and the roof. The rest Sarah and I did ourselves over the years." Dorothy paused before a painting on the wall, Sarah's rendition of the ranch house against the backdrop of mountains.
She was talented, she said softly.
"She was," Virgil agreed. He hesitated, then added, "There are more of her paintings upstairs. I could show you after dinner if you'd like." Dorothy looked at him, understanding the significance of the offer. "I'd like that very much." Dinner was a lively affair, with Jensen and the hands eager to impress the new schoolteacher with tales of ranch life. Dorothy held her own, sharing stories of her teaching experiences back east that had the men laughing and shaking their heads in amazement. Virgil, watching her from the head of the table, was struck by how naturally she fit into this setting. There was no awkwardness, no sense that she was out of place in the home he'd shared with Sarah. Instead, it felt right somehow, as if the house itself had been waiting for laughter to fill it again. After dinner, while the hands cleared up, Virgil took Dorothy upstairs to see Sarah's paintings. They were displayed throughout the upper floor, landscapes mostly, capturing the beauty of the Colorado prairie and mountains. "These are extraordinary," Dorothy said, studying a small canvas, showing a sunset over the ranch. "She saw beauty in everything, didn't she?" "She did," Virgil agreed. He led Dorothy to the last door at the end of the hall but paused before opening it. Dorothy seemed to sense his hesitation. "We don't have to go in there, if it's too difficult." Virgil shook his head. "No, I want to show you." He opened the door to what would have been the nursery. Dorothy entered quietly, taking in the yellow walls, the empty cradle, the small bookshelf already filled with children's books. She didn't speak, but Virgil saw tears well in her eyes. "We found out she was expecting in April," Virgil said, his voice low. "The baby would have come in November. Sarah was so excited to be a mother." Dorothy turned to him, her expression full of compassion. "Oh, Virgil, I'm so very sorry. For a while after she died, I couldn't see the point in anything," Virgil admitted. "The ranch, the house, living. It all seemed meaningless without her and the baby." "And now?" Dorothy asked gently. Virgil looked around the room, then back at Dorothy. "Now I think maybe there's still some meaning to be found. Not the same as before, but something." Dorothy nodded, understanding. Life has a way of offering second chances, if we're brave enough to take them. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of all that had been lost and all that might still be found hanging between them. "We should rejoin the others," Virgil said finally, reluctant to break the moment, but aware of the passing time. As they descended the stairs, Dorothy paused halfway down. "Thank you for sharing that with me, Virgil. I know how difficult it must have been." Virgil nodded, unable to express how much it had meant to him to finally share that room, that pain, with someone who understood. The weeks that followed fell into a pleasant rhythm. Virgil divided his time between the ranch and town, often stopping by the school to fix a loose board or adjust a shelf. Dorothy threw herself into teaching, quickly becoming beloved by her students and their parents alike. They continued to have dinner together several evenings a week, sometimes at the hotel, sometimes at Dorothy's cottage, where she proved to be an excellent cook. On Sundays, Dorothy would join Virgil and his hands for dinner at the ranch. The townspeople, seeing them together so often, began to accept their friendship as natural. If there were still whispers about the propriety of it, they faded as both Virgil and Dorothy proved themselves valuable members of the community. October brought the first frost, and with it, the blooming of the black-eyed Susans on Sarah's grave. Virgil and Dorothy rode out to see them one crisp morning, marveling at the bright yellow flowers dotting the hillside. "They're beautiful," Virgil said, genuinely moved by the sight. "Thank you for planting them." "They'll come back year after year," Dorothy told him, "even stronger each time." As they stood beside the grave, now marked by the proper headstone Virgil had ordered, Dorothy slipped her hand into his. It was the first time they had touched in such a deliberate way, and Virgil felt a jolt of surprise followed by a deep comfort. They stood like that, hand in hand, until the cold drove them back to town. That evening, as Virgil walked Dorothy home after dinner at the hotel, she invited him in for coffee. It was something she'd done before, but tonight felt different somehow. The air between them seemed charged with unspoken possibilities. As Dorothy prepared the coffee, moving comfortably around her small kitchen, Virgil found himself watching her with a clarity he hadn't felt in months. She was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. There was a steadiness to her, a quiet strength that had helped pull him back from the brink of despair. "Penny for your thoughts," Dorothy said, catching him staring. "I was just thinking about how much has changed since you arrived in Clearwater," Virgil admitted. "How much I've changed." Dorothy set the coffee cups on the table and sat across from him. "All change isn't bad." "No," Virgil agreed. "It isn't." They talked late into the evening, about everything and nothing, school happenings, ranch business, books they'd both read. When it came time for Virgil to leave, he found himself reluctant to go. At the door, Dorothy turned to him. "Virgil, she hesitated, seeming to search for the right words. "These past months have meant a great deal to me. Your friendship has been a gift I never expected to find here." Virgil nodded, his throat suddenly tight.
"For me too, Dorothy."
She looked up at him, her green eyes reflecting the lamplight. "Is that all it is? Friendship?" The directness of the question took Virgil by surprise, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Dorothy had always been forthright. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "I care for you, more than I thought I could care for anyone again."
But
it feels like betrayal," Dorothy finished for him. "I understand. I felt the same way the first time I realized I was thinking of you as more than a friend." Relief washed over Virgil at her understanding. "It's too soon, isn't it?" Dorothy sighed. "By whose measure? Society's? Perhaps. But Thomas has been gone 2 years, and though I'll always love him, I know he would want me to be happy." She touched Virgil's cheek gently. "I believe Sarah would want the same for you." Virgil covered her hand with his own. "I think she would, but I need to be sure, Dorothy. For both our sakes." Dorothy nodded, accepting his caution. "I'm not going anywhere, Virgil. Take all the time you need." He left her cottage with much to think about, his mind and heart in turmoil. As he rode back to the ranch under a star-filled sky, Virgil found himself talking to Sarah again, asking for guidance he knew would never come in words, but might come in the quiet of his own heart. The next morning, Virgil woke with a sense of clarity. He went about his day as usual, working with the hands, checking on the cattle, repairing a broken fence. But all the while, his mind was made up. That evening, he rode to town earlier than usual. His first stop was the general store, where he purchased a small item that he tucked carefully into his pocket. Next, he visited the florist, selecting a bouquet of daisies, Sarah's favorite, but also, he noticed, flowers Dorothy often admired. The sun was setting as he approached Dorothy's cottage. Light glowed warmly in the windows, and smoke curled from the chimney against the darkening sky. Virgil tied Penny to the hitching post, straightened his hat, and knocked on the door. Dorothy opened it, surprise and pleasure lighting her face. "Virgil, I wasn't expecting you this evening." "I hope I'm not intruding," he said. "Never," she assured him, stepping back to let him in. "I was just grading papers. Would you like some tea?" Actually, Virgil said, producing the flowers from behind his back, I was hoping you might take a walk with me. Dorothy's eyes widened at the sight of the daisies. They're beautiful, she said, taking them with a smile. Let me put them in water, and I'll get my shawl. They walked through town as night fell, greeting neighbors, stopping to admire the harvest decorations that adorned many of the storefronts. Virgil led them toward the edge of town, where a small park overlooked the valley below. It's a lovely evening, Dorothy remarked as they sat on a bench beneath a large oak tree. Though getting colder. Winter will be here soon. Dorothy, Virgil began, turning to face her. I've been doing a lot of thinking since last night. She looked at him, her expression open but guarded. Oh. I'll always love Sarah, he said. Nothing will ever change that. She was my first love, the mother of the child we never got to meet, the woman I thought I'd grow old with. Dorothy nodded, waiting for him to continue. But life doesn't always go according to plan, Virgil went on. Sarah taught me that we have to make the most of the time we're given because we never know how much that will be. He took Dorothy's hand in his. You came into my life when I thought there was nothing left to live for. You showed me that grief doesn't have to be the end of everything. That it's possible to honor those we've lost by continuing to live, to love. Dorothy's eyes glistened with tears in the moonlight. Virgil. I'm not rushing this, he assured her. I know it's only been a few months since we met, but I also know how I feel. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver locket. This isn't a ring. I'm not asking you to marry me, not yet, but I am asking if you'd be willing to court properly, to see where this might lead. Dorothy took the locket with trembling hands, opening it to find it empty. There's nothing inside, she observed. I thought we could fill it together, Virgil explained. New memories for a new beginning. Tears spilled onto Dorothy's cheeks. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I would like that very much. Virgil reached out and gently wiped away her tears. Then, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, tentative and sweet, but filled with promise. When they parted, Dorothy was smiling through her tears. I think Thomas and Sarah would approve, don't you? I do, Virgil said, surprised to find he meant it completely. They'd want us to be happy. They walked back to Dorothy's cottage hand in hand, no longer concerned about who might see them or what might be said. They had found something precious and unexpected in each other, and they were both done hiding it. Winter came to Colorado Territory with a vengeance that year, blanketing Clearwater in snow and ice. The school remained open, with Virgil often escorting Dorothy through the worst of the weather to ensure she arrived safely. Their courtship progressed slowly but steadily, each day bringing them closer together. Christmas brought a special joy to the town, with Dorothy organizing a school pageant that had parents beaming with pride. Afterward, they gathered at Virgil's ranch for a celebration that filled the house with laughter and song for the first time since Sarah's death. As midnight approached and the last guests departed, Dorothy and Virgil stood on the porch, watching the snow fall in the lantern light. Happy Christmas, Virgil, Dorothy said, leaning against him. Happiest I've had in a long while, he replied, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Because of you. Dorothy looked up at him, her face serious despite the festive evening. I've been thinking about something. The locket you gave me, I know what I want to put in it. What's that? Virgil asked. A lock of Sarah's hair, if you have one, Dorothy said. And one of Thomas's, which I keep in my Bible. And then, perhaps, one of yours and one of mine. All together. Virgil was stunned by the suggestion. You'd want that? To carry Sarah with you? She'll always be part of who you are, Dorothy said simply. Just as Thomas will always be part of me. I don't want to erase our past loves, Virgil. I want to honor them, even as we build something new together. In that moment, Any lingering doubts Virgil might have had about Dorothy being the right woman for him vanished completely. He drew her into his arms and kissed her deeply, no longer tentative but sure. "I love you, Dorothy Wilson," he said when they finally parted. "And I think it's time I asked you properly to be my wife." Dorothy's eyes widened. "Are you certain?" "It's only been 5 months since we met," Virgil finished for her. "But I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Sarah would say life's too short to waste time when you know what you want. Dorothy laughed, a sound of pure joy. Thomas would say exactly the same thing. Her expression grew serious again. "But Virgil, I need to tell you something before you ask." "Something important." Virgil waited, suddenly anxious. "The doctors told me after Thomas died that I likely can't have children," Dorothy said, the words clearly difficult for her. "There was a fever, complications. If that changes your mind, I'll understand." Virgil's heart ached for the pain he saw in her eyes. "Dorothy, I've already had my chance at fatherhood taken from me once. What matters to me is building a life with you, however that looks." He took her hands in his. "But if you want children, there are always those who need homes. We could give a good life to a child who needs one." Relief and love shone in Dorothy's eyes. "I'd like that. Very much." Virgil knelt in the snow, still holding her hands. "Dorothy Wilson, will you marry me? Will you make a new life with me, honoring the past but looking toward the future?" "Yes," Dorothy said without hesitation. "With all my heart, yes." They were married in the spring, when the prairie was ablaze with wildflowers. The ceremony took place on the hillside near Sarah's grave, which was now a beautiful spot marked by the headstone and surrounded by blooming black-eyed Susans. Dorothy had suggested the location, feeling it was right to include Sarah in this new beginning. Virgil had been hesitant at first, but as he stood with Dorothy before the minister, Sheriff Collins and Jensen serving as witnesses, he felt Sarah's approval in the gentle breeze that stirred the flowers. "I, Virgil James Hayes, take thee, Dorothy and Wilson, to be my wedded wife." The words were traditional, but the emotion behind them was anything but ordinary. They were two people who had known profound loss, finding in each other the courage to love again. After the ceremony, as they prepared to return to town for the celebration Mayor Thompson had insisted on throwing for them, Virgil and Dorothy lingered for a moment at Sarah's grave. "Thank you," Virgil said softly to the headstone, "for everything you were to me, and for somehow helping me find Dorothy when I was lost." Dorothy knelt and placed her bridal bouquet, a mixture of daisies and black-eyed Susans, beside the grave. Around her neck hung the locket Virgil had given her, now containing the 4 locks of hair, Sarah's, Thomas's, Virgil's, and her own. "I'll take care of him," she promised. "And I'll make sure the children at school know about the wonderful teacher who should have been there before me." As they rode back to town, husband and wife now, Virgil felt a peace he hadn't known since before Sarah's illness. The pain of losing her would never completely disappear, but it had transformed into something he could carry without being crushed by it. Dorothy's hand found his as they approached Clearwater, where the townspeople were gathered to celebrate their union. "Ready to begin our new chapter?" she asked. Virgil looked at his wife, this remarkable woman who had taught him how to live again, and smiled. "More than ready," he replied, squeezing her hand. "Let's make it a good one." And together, they rode toward their future, carrying the lessons of the past but no longer bound by its sorrows. The prairie stretched before them, vast and full of possibility, much like the life they would build together, a life neither had expected to find but both would cherish all the more for having once been lost. 2 years later, on a warm summer evening, Virgil sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching as Dorothy played with their daughter in the yard. Martha Thomas Hayes wasn't their child by birth. They had adopted her 6 months earlier when her parents, both customers on Virgil's cattle drive, had died of typhoid, but she was theirs in every way that mattered. At 4 years old, Martha was bright and curious, with a love of books that Dorothy nurtured and an interest in horses that delighted Virgil. She had brought a joy to their home that neither had thought possible after the losses they had endured. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard, Dorothy scooped Martha up and carried her to the porch. "I think it's someone's bedtime," she said, kissing the child's dark curls. "Story first?" Martha asked, her eyes wide and pleading. "One story," Virgil agreed, holding out his arms to take her. "Then bed." As Dorothy went inside to prepare Martha's bath, Virgil held his daughter close, breathing in the scent of sunshine and grass in her hair. "What story would you like tonight, little one?" Martha thought for a moment, her small brow furrowed in concentration. "The one about the flowers on the hill," she decided. Virgil smiled. It was her favorite, though he and Dorothy had been careful to tell it in a way appropriate for a child. "Once upon a time," he began, "there was a cowboy who was very sad because someone he loved very much had to go away to heaven." Martha nodded solemnly. She understood about heaven, where her first parents had gone. "The cowboy thought he would be sad forever," Virgil continued. "But then he met a kind lady teacher who knew just how he felt, because someone she loved had gone to heaven too. And they planted flowers together," Martha prompted, knowing the story by heart. "That's right," Virgil confirmed. "They planted flowers that would come back year after year, to remember the people they loved who were in heaven. And slowly, the cowboy and the teacher became friends, and then they fell in love. And then they got married and found me," Martha finished with satisfaction. Virgil hugged her close. "That's right. And they lived happily ever after with their little girl, who they loved very, very much." Later, after Martha was asleep, Virgil found Dorothy sitting on the porch, gazing at the stars. He sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "She wanted the flower story again," he told her. Dorothy smiled. "It's a good story. A true one." "The best kind," Virgil agreed. He looked out at the ranch, at the life they had built together. "Do you ever wonder what Sarah and Thomas would think of all this?" Dorothy leaned her head against his shoulder. "I like to think they'd be proud of us. For finding the courage to love again, to make a family together." Virgil nodded. "I think so too." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The pain of loss would always be part of them, but it no longer defined them. Instead, it had shaped them into people capable of deeper love, greater appreciation for each day they were given. "I love you, Dorothy Hayes," Virgil said, his voice low and sincere. "And I love you, Virgil Hayes," she replied, turning to kiss him softly. As night fell over the Colorado prairie, they held each other close, grateful for second chances and the unexpected joy they had found together. The wildflowers on the hillside might sleep through the winter, but they always returned with the spring, a reminder that life, with all its sorrows and joys, continues in an endless cycle of renewal and hope. And for a cowboy who had once buried his young wife on the prairie, that hope had come in the form of a widow who had taught him how to live again.